أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم سبحانك اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Welcome back. We've had quite a long gap since the last class, which was before Ramadan, and we were in a chapter that was dealing with various different types of transactions, especially those which are called tabarru'at, those which are given freely without compensation, where one side gives something and the other side does not have to give something in recompense. So last time we were talking about hiba and sadaqah, which are two ways of giving, one being fi sabilillah, for the sake of Allah purely, which is sadaqah, and hiba, which is something which is given because of the person who's in front of you, for love of that person, or to strengthen a bond between you and him, or something of that nature. Now we're moving on to another type of giving, which is not actually giving the actual thing itself, but giving the usage of something, which is called a hubus, or a waqf. This is what's known as sadaqatun jariyah, because the giving of it continues long after a person has died. In fact, we still today have awqaf or ahbas that were given by companions of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that still exist until this present day, and the benefits from them are still being taken by the people to whom they were given, the categories of people to whom they were given, very often to the poor of the Muslims. So a waqf can be given in the same way as sadaqah, purely for the sake of Allah, that's usually given to certain categories of people, such as the poor, or students, or imams, or things of that nature. Or it can be given like a hiba, like a gift, to your family, to ensure that something in your possession, the usage of it remains in the possession or to be used by your family moving forward, and won't be sold by them, but it will always be something ever present for your children or any other specific people that you might want to give that to. There are two main words that I use for it, waqf, and the word that he's using here, which is hubus, which you may well have heard both. The most common one is waqf. It is a highly recommended act, and that is proven by the fact that many of the companions gave property or put property aside. Waqafa literally means to stop anything being done with this property after they have made it into a waqf, or habasa, which means to confine it, to make sure it can no longer be used for anything else. And we have today still waqfs that were made by Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh, Sayyidina Uthman, Sayyidina Ali, Sayyidina Talha, Sayyidina Zubair, and many others of the companions. You can go to Medina al-Munawwara and find many of these awqaf still present. They were in the form of houses, orchards, wells. Sayyidina Uthman very famously gave a well as a waqf. And many other things. Sometimes they were living creatures that were made into awqaf. And this specific form of giving was something that was specific to the Muslims. It had not been done by the Arabs prior to Islam. Prior to Islam, they had been giving gifts, hiba, they had been giving hiba lithawab, they had been giving sadaqah, all these other types of giving, but the waqf or the hubus was something that was specific to the Muslims and was established by the Muslims. It wasn't even known outside of the Muslims in other societies, particularly. But it is a practice that you find actually in many parts of the world today, of a similar nature. It became part of the practice of people across the world because of the example of the Muslims in this particular thing, the waqf, still present today. And as I'm going to come to when I come to Umrah, there are other practices that the Muslims established that you can still find today, even in Western Europe, that are still being done. So he says, وَمَنْ حَبَسَ دَارًا فَهِيَ عَلَى مَا جَعَلَهَا عَلَيْهِ. So if somebody creates a waqf or a hubus of a property, a house, and when he creates this waqf, he stipulates exactly what it is to be used for. In other words, who gets to benefit from it, and the limits of the benefits that are taken from it, and any other stipulations, such as if it's dilapidated, whether it can be sold or not, who looks after the property on his behalf, the nadir, and all these other things. When he does that in front of witnesses, this is now a binding document. It cannot be changed. He cannot later, because he's the owner, come and say, actually, I don't want it to go to that particular category of people anymore. I don't want students to benefit. I just want teachers to benefit. He can't come and change his mind about it. It's done. Once a waqf is created, it is done from the moment it is taken possession of. He says, in hizat. So this is a particular thing. You write this document in front of witnesses. Then when either the person you have appointed to look after it for you or the beneficiaries start benefiting from it, then that's it. It can no longer be reversed. Nothing can change it. So if you become bankrupt, if you die before they've taken possession of it, then it's still your property and your debtors can claim it. But if it's taken possession of and then you die after somebody has benefited from it, that's it. It's no longer your, it is your property, but it's property that can no longer be touched by anybody to whom you owe money. That's why they make these specific things when it comes to the importance of possession, because often people had debts and people's creditors have rights over your money. So when does that right stop? When you've given something away, when it's taken possession of. But obviously you're not allowed to give things away once you've actually already been declared bankrupt, because that means that everything in your hands belongs to your creditors. Again, that's why we also said about people when they are in their final sickness, because they're basically considered to be almost dead. So anything after your death is no longer yours to distribute either. So he says, in hizat qabla mawtihi, if it has been taken possession of before he has died. وَلَوْ كَانَتْ حُبُسًا عَلَى وَلَدِهِ الصَّغِيرِ جَازَتْ حِيَازَتُهُ لَهُ. So I said there's two types of hubus. There's one that's specific for categories of people, or generally sadaqah in the way of Allah. So like for the poor, generally, or for very often in the past, every university like the Qayrawan and the Azhar would have something specific for students, awqaf that were created for students. Or it might be for, people from a particular background. This is for the Jamaicans and people who come from that background are able to benefit from it, for example. And then there are ones that are for specific people. This is for Ahmad and his progeny. This is for my children and any children that they may have. That's another type of waqf. And people would often do this for, particular child that they may have. They want to make sure that the property that they have doesn't get sold, because so that their family remains in that particular place. And so they would then make it a waqf for a particular child or for all their children, to make sure that the house will remain after their death. He says, if you do that, it's not a cunning way of being able to avoid inheritance. You can't do that, he says here, and then continue to live in that place, except, he says here, if you have a young child, but not in the case of a house. But let's say, for example, you have a horse that you want to give to a child of yours. This child is 8 years old. He can't look after the horse on his own. So you give this horse the use of this horse, not the horse itself, but the use of the riding of this horse to your child. He can't take possession of it because he has no ability at that age. So you are allowed in that circumstance to keep possession of that animal. But if it was a house, there's a slightly different case. You're not allowed to continue to live in that house, but you do keep possession of it for him and you rent it out for him. You're only allowed to live in less than half of it, basically, the half that you need in order to continue to look after it for your child.
Like if I have a holiday house in Jamaica and I say it's for
the usage of
my family,
yeah,
I can't go there on holiday anymore.
What you shouldn't do, you shouldn't do if you're
okay.
I mean, if you already have a place to live,
yeah,
then no, you're not allowed to go and use that house, because otherwise it's just a trick.
Okay.
Because you haven't really relinquished it. But if it's your only house and you say this is for the usage of my children, then you are permitted to stop using it completely as your own, to cut yourself off into a small isolated part of it,
Mm.
and then to rent the rest of it out, and all of that to save up for your children, basically. So he says, if it is a hubus, something is left as a hubus for his young children below the age of puberty, or below the age of rushd, in fact, because I mean, there's two things here. There's age, so a child can reach puberty, and that child can still be safi or majnoon. So a child could reach the age of puberty, and that child has no financial capacity whatsoever. I mean, this is probably true now. In fact, the majority of children are not financially capable of looking after themselves until much later than puberty. So, I mean, in a sense, they might even be considered safi at that age. And conversely, with women, because they were not, generally speaking, they didn't go out and work in the same way. They needed to be looked after until marriage, because they were completely reliant on either the nafaqah from their parents or the nafaqah them from their. But nowadays, women are rashida in the sense that they have the capacity to earn their own living. So things are not quite as black and white, because this comes into when we come into marriage and a father being allowed to force his child to marry somebody.
Yeah,
that's no longer applicable in their rashida. So his permission is still needed, but that ability to force them changes. So there are certain things that change as a result of the type of world that we live in, where rushd comes into play, not just a child being old enough. So he says here, وَلَوْ كَانَتْ حُبُسًا عَلَى وَلَدِهِ الصَّغِيرِ جَازَتْ حِيَازَتُهُ. He is allowed to keep possession of it, lahu, on his behalf, إِلَى أَنْ يَبْلُغَ, until he reaches puberty, وَلْيُكْرِهَا lahu, and he should rent it out for him, وَلَا يَسْكُنُهَا, and not live in it. So as I just mentioned with the house, that's a specific thing. But by not living in it, it says just it means that not the whole of it. He can stay in a portion of it. فَإِن لَمْ يَدَعْ سُكْنَاهَا حَتَّى مَاتْ بَطَلَتْ. If he does not stop living in it until he dies, then the waqf doesn't count, and that house is then divided up as property between all of his children. So, if you try and avoid, you want one child to have more benefit than the other ones by using this as, you want your house to remain and one child to have more benefit, and you just continue to use it as your own property until you die, that's completely torn to pieces, and it goes back to the default position, which is, each person inherits a share, and it gets divided up as property amongst all of them.
What happens when
the condition, which is the hiyajah, must be met?
Yes. So even when the children are older, that condition still applies. But sometimes the parent, even when they're older, can still continue to live there, but only in a portion of it. But if the child is above the age of puberty, the father has to give up the possession of the house to that child, and the child then becomes the person who has the right of usage of the house. Obviously, he can't sell the house because the ownership of the house still belongs to the father, and then when he dies, that ownership gets divided up amongst his heirs. There's a reason why Imam Malik said that he continues to own it, because the owner has certain rights. For example, if somebody wants to come and alter the property, they can't do that unless they are an owner, because you're not giving away the ownership of this property, you're giving away the usage of it. So there are certain rights that are still given to an owner. There's another thing that people don't know about when it comes to awqaf with the position of Malik, which is different from other people. Now, there is an assumption that when you make a waqf, it's forever. So with mosques, this is the case. You can't do a temporary waqf for a mosque. But with property, you can, according to Malik. You can set the time period. So you can say this house will be a waqf for the next 10 years. And the beneficiaries of it during that period of time, when it's rented out, say you stipulate that you want it to be rented out rather than used. The rent will go to such and such a category of people, and they get it for those 10 years. But when those 10 years have finished, it reverts back to its original default state.
So that can be land too.
Yeah, you can do that with land. But this is specific to Malik. I believe according to some of the other madhabs, And it's not permissible to have temporary waqf. Waqf is forever. But Imam Malik took the position that it could be temporary. So he was unique in that position as far as I'm aware. But during that period of time, the owner has no right to any usage of it. And if the owner does not say anything about any time period in the contract, then the default is that it's forever. So if you neglect to say it's for 10 years, it's forever. Or 5 years or whatever. وَإِنْ انْقَرَضَ مَنْ حُبِّسَتْ عَلَيْهِ. So if all of the people, so for example now, if I said this house is a waqf for Ahmed, Salih, and Jamal, and then they all die, what happens to the property? So he says here, if all of the people who you have set the waqf out for die, he says it goes back to being, it remains a waqf, but the waqf goes to the closest related people to the person who established the waqf. So not the people necessarily who he would have to look after himself if he's still alive, but anybody who is in need of his near relatives, they take precedence over anyone. And if there's no relatives, then it goes to the poor of the Muslims. And the reason why it goes to them first is because the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "La yaqbalu Allahu sadaqatan wa dhu rahimin muhtaj." Allah will not accept any sadaqah if a person has relatives of his who are in need, and he's not looking after those people, close relatives, not like a distant cousin 10 times removed or something, but close relatives.
So what happens? Is that still the same when you become Muslim and you have that non-Muslim relative?
No, this is referring to Muslim relative, but you still are expected to look after family regardless. But you don't have an obligation in quite the same way, unless they are parents. A person's parents are an exception, or children. But it's shown also by the fact that, well, generally speaking, with sadaqah, when things are fi sabilillah, is usually for Muslims when nothing else is mentioned. Because sometimes when you give to non-Muslims, you could be strengthening people against the deen of Allah. But sometimes also there are cases where the Messenger of Allah gave to non-Muslims, or people who recently become Muslim, but there were reasons to suspect that their Islam might have been for other reasons. He gave great gifts to them, or great, even from the sadaqah of the Muslims, the zakat, in order to strengthen their hearts, the mu'allafatul qulub, as it's called. So there are grounds for giving non-Muslims, but it depends. You're allowed to set a waqf for non-Muslims. So if you say this waqf is for so and so, then it's for that person, whoever that person is. And I mean, if this person, this non-Muslim is somebody who you'd be expected to look after. And the difference also is if it goes to family, it's equally divided amongst those who are in need. So a woman gets the same as a man. It's not inheritance. A woman who is in need will get exactly the same share as a man who's in need. It's not the same as inheritance. This happens even if the founder himself is still alive. It'll still go to these near relatives. Obviously, then if they all perish, then it goes to the poor of the Muslims in general. If the waqf was for a specific group of people, but you can't find people like that, for example, if it's for students of the Qayrawan, and there are no more students of the Qayrawan who are in need, then you can't simply give it then to family. You find students of other like institutions and give it to them. They are the ones who take precedence next, generally. The next thing he's going to go back to Hubus in a minute, Awqaf, but he takes a detour here, which is something that's called an Umrah, which is very similar to a waqf, but it's not exactly the same. Now, a waqf, as I said, is forever, or is for a specific period of time. And Umrah relates to the lifetime of the person to whom it's being given, or the lifetime of his children. So it could be one day, it could be 50 years. So it's not got a specific period of time, and it's not forever. So it's a gift that's given to somebody, and it's not usually sadaqah in the same way. It's more because of some connection you have to that person. Now, do you know Abdul Hafiz? The property that he has in Valencia was given to him in exactly this way by a non-Muslim. So this practice still exists in Spain today, and the non-Muslims have taken it on. So he was given this house until, I think, until for the lifespan of his children, for him to use it in that period, but it's not owned by him. So that actually still exists today.
Oh.
And actually it's very, very beneficial, because even if it's beneficial for the giver, because I may have quite a lot of property. Maybe I'm a rich person. I've got lots of different properties. I can't look after all these properties myself. One of the things in the deen is if you leave a property and it becomes mawat and it dies, somebody can come along and take possession of it because it's being wasted. So if I can find somebody I can give it to for their lifetime and they make use of it, then it's not dead property. So it's one of the ways I can ensure that property that I have remains looked after. So it can be beneficial for both parties, but obviously it's most beneficial for the person to whom it's given. So he says, وَمَنْ أَعْمَرَ رَجُلًا حَيَاتَهُ دَارًا. If somebody gives a man the usage of a house for his lifetime, رَجَعَتْ بَعْدَ مَوْتِ السَّاكِنِ مِلْكًا لِرَبِّهِ. It goes back to being the...
And housekeeping and documents and everything function. I always wondered, like in Morocco, when I was living in the countryside in the mountains, I noticed the most important person in each village was a Qadi.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. The Qadi and the Hakim were very, very similar. Because
So they would have a local emir, but
they were often the same person originally. But then the roles can get separated. I mean, if you look at in the books of fiqh, they often talk about the local emirs and local chieftains being allowed to issue rulings. So I mean, but sometimes they wouldn't have been comfortable doing it because they wouldn't have felt they had enough knowledge. So somebody specific. But the word hakim means both the person who issues hukms and the person who rules. So I mean, it's both things. Those online, we probably missed a bit. We've been talking about the umrah, which is something which is very, very similar to a waqf. And that is when you give somebody the usage of something for their lifetime or for the lifetime of their children. And as I mentioned, this is a practice that has continued to be done today, even among non-Muslims who obviously inherited this practice from the Muslims. And he mentioned also that once they have died, the property reverts back to the original owner. And he also mentioned that if the original owner dies, then whoever was his heir on the day that he dies, when the person to whom the property was given dies, that property reverts back to them, to his estate, to his heirs. And then we're talking about when you have a waqf that's for specific people. If any of those specific people die, the share that was going to that person goes to the other people who are specifically mentioned. وَيُؤْثَرُ فِي الْحُبُسِ أَهْلُ الْحَاجَةِ بِالسُّكْنَى. So basically here he's talking about another thing. Now, if I establish a waqf, and that waqf is in the form of accommodation, and I make a nadir, and I point him to look after this, and then 100 people come forward, all wanting accommodation, and there's only 10 places available. He says here, how does this guy go about choosing which of these 100 people that he gives the accommodation to? They all may be poor. So how does he decide? Well, number one, it's left up to his ijtihad, as he mentions in this. It's left up to his discretion based on the knowledge that he has. But he should focus on the people who have most need to whatever that waqf is providing. So here, if in the accommodation, it might be somebody who is homeless, or somebody who is living in a property that's inadequate to his and his family's needs. The homeless person would take precedence, and the person whose accommodation is inadequate to his needs would be the next one. And then it will go down, person who maybe it's a little bit too expensive for him might be next, and then so on and so on and so on. But he has a criteria by which he decides to whom. Now, once this person has moved in, and then suddenly he becomes rich after moving in, what happens? Is he turfed out?
Yeah.
No. No, he's not. He has right of possession once he's in, unless you specifically say in the waqf that this is only for people who are still poor. You have to specify that. Otherwise, he got it in a way which was valid, and now he's in possession. So he shouldn't be removed from his possession because it's his now. Moreover, if this person has possession, he's even allowed to go on long journeys and rent it out if he has a specific intention of coming back. But if he just disappears and is gone for a long time and nobody knows what he's doing, then obviously then it can be taken back and given to the next person on the list. It's not necessarily inherited by him either. Once that person who it was given to dies, it doesn't automatically pass down to the next generation unless they fulfill the same criteria that he did. So he says, وَيُؤْثَرُ فِي الْحُبُسِ أَهْلُ الْحَاجَةِ بِالسُّكْنَى وَالْغُلَّةِ. So it depends. So for example, if I bought an office block and then I gave the office block, made the office block into a waqf, and then I rented out all of the offices and it brought in decent amounts of money, and I said this money is to go to students of such and such a place, then 100 students come and there's only enough money to cover the expenses of 10 students. The same thing applies. You choose whoever is in most need of that money. I mean, sometimes it's not easy to know. So actually, it would require quite a lot of investigation on the part of the nadir, the person you put in charge. This nadir, by the way, should not be the person who creates the waqf. It should be somebody separate from him. We don't have this modern thing of where somebody creates, a waqf or something like that creates money for the poor and then puts his name to it. The I don't know what, these rich people, the Carnegie Foundation or whatever it is. So suddenly, it becomes a way of actually increasing your influence, and that's not the purpose of this. Yeah, philanthropists, yeah, or the Gates Foundation or whatever it might be. They actually use it as a way of expanding influence, and that the original purpose of this is
saving tax.
Yeah, sometimes, but I mean, you want to disassociate yourself. You want this is something which is fi sabilillah. The more you put your name to something that's not required of you, the more you open yourself up to riyā and doing this in order for people to see you as doing it rather than purely for the sake of Allah. So we generally take the position that the nadir should be somebody who is not the person. It can be his son, but generally speaking, it's better even to disconnect from your family entirely, if possible. That's the general position of the madhab. وَمَنْ سَكَنَ فَلَا يَخْرُجُ لِغَيْرِهِ. If somebody takes up residence, he's not turfed out for somebody else. إِلَّا أَنْ يَكُونَ فِي أَصْلِ الْحُبُسِ شَرْطٌ. Except if there is a stipulation made in the original contract, the original waqf document, saying that if somebody is no longer poor, they're removed. Or saying if somebody is no longer studying. Or actually, when it comes to when you make the waqf for students of a particular place, then if that person ceases to be a student, he is turfed out. Because this is for people in a specific... So if it's halls of residence, for example, you can't continue to live there after you've graduated. So that's a slightly separate thing. But if it's something that's purely for the poor, then that person is not turfed out because he has become rich. وَلَا يُبَاعُ الْحُبُسِ وَإِنْ خَرَبْ. No hubus, no waqf is allowed to be sold, even if it becomes dilapidated and broken down. This is the general position, the default position of Malik. I mean, it's to stop, it's basically for the purpose of sadd al-dhara'i'. Because, you could turn something into waqf and then you could then start saying that it's dilapidated, but it's not really dilapidated because you want to do something else with the money, but you've already created this and this is now done. So it stops people from being able to play around with these things.
That what done origin places. Somebody has a building and they can't, so they want to use it for something else, so they let it run down, and then it's like, okay.
Yeah. So you say, so then you've sold it, and then you maybe sell it to a friend, so it can be used for some other purpose. So now you freed it from its waqfness. So it basically closes the door to people playing around. That's why Imam Malik forbade it. But he does say in a minute that sometimes it's permitted to swap it for something else if it's clearly 100%. But I mean, that goes against the default position. This is the default position. But there are extenuating circumstances where it's clear. For example, the enemy has come and taken over this country, so very few Muslims are living there anymore.
Yeah.
So the mosque that was once open to 1,000 people, only 10 people are able to go there now. Even then, generally speaking, you shouldn't. But maybe there's a new place that there is no capacity to, and the person who's now living here has a building there, that if you swap it, then the 1,000 Muslims who are living there will now have a place. Then there might be some grounds, but generally speaking, it's really disliked. So he says here, well, he goes, before he goes back to that, he goes, وَيُبَاعُ الْفَرَسْ الْحُبُسِ يُقْلَبُ وَيُجْعَلُ ثَمَنُهُ. So basically, there are certain things where it is allowed to sell something. And that is, for example, when you give horses to be used in jihad. This is a specific one he mentioned, like the tanks of the past, basically. So he says, if you give a horse and that horse now has become sick, no longer has the strength or the energy to be able to carry out, or, maybe it's become skittish or whatever, anything that's happened to this horse, it no longer can be used for jihad. People can't take it and then bring it back when they go to fight. Then he says here, then you can sell that horse because it's not fulfilling its function. And what you should do is use the money got from it to buy another horse like it. Of course, it may not be enough to afford a horse. So then if there are other horses like it, you sell them all and buy a horse with them. Or if it's not enough, even once you sold all of them to get anything like it, then you can use it for the people who are fighting jihad. But otherwise, yeah, no, but a horse is very different to a donkey.
Okay, but I'm just saying, if it's at least a pack donkey can carry.
Yeah, but I mean that the purpose of this waqf was not for carrying. The purpose of a horse was to be was to attack. Cavalry was such a weapon compared to infantry in the past.
You still need a donkey in the background.
Yeah. Well, so وَيُجْعَلُ ثَمَنُهُ فِي مِثْلِهِ, and you use the money for something just like it, or يُعَانُ بِهِ فِيهِ, or you help to buy another animal like it. That was the basic point of it. By the way, there is a time when waqfs are allowed to be sold, and that is when they are by the central mosque of a city, the Jummah mosque, and the Jummah mosque needs to expand, and its expansion is being blocked by a waqf property. This often happened in many of the Muslim countries where basically almost everything became waqf property.
Yeah, or the surrounding.
Yeah. So if that mosque can't expand without that property being sold, or that property being swapped for another waqf, then that's when it's allowed. It can be sold, and then that person can then give that it can be sold to the sultan. Then he uses that money to.
You notice, like around Mecca and Medina, like it's expanding. It's got hotels around it, and
hotels you're not allowed to sell a waqf to build a hotel. That's for sure.
I said that the mosque keeps expanding around.
But the mosque itself, yes. If there is a hotel and it's in the way of the mosque, then the basic rule is that hotel should be sold and another one bought somewhere else. I mean,
as you mentioned, the principle is they will sell the hotel and then they buy another location.
Yes.
Into another extension.
Yes.
Which is they save their waqf, but they just change the location.
Yeah, and you have to keep the same waqf with the same original thing that it was made for. That can't change. واختلف في المعاوضة بالربع الخرب. So this is, I just mentioned earlier, there's a difference of opinion about property, physical land or houses that have become dilapidated or stopped being used. Rab'a is often maybe used for land upon which things are grown, but it can be all types of land. He says here, بِرَبْعٍ غَيْرِ خَرِبٍ. You can swap it out for land that is of use, not dilapidated. So, for example, if you are in, let's say, there are all these places where deserts have increased, and the Sahara has expanded. And there may have been a very wonderful little place that had lots of crops and things coming from it. And that land has now become useless for the purpose for which it was originally devised. Maybe there's another purpose. Maybe it's got oil or something. I don't know. But it can be sold and then something like that bought somewhere else for the same purpose.
A lot of research on this.
Or swapped. But he's saying it's swapped here specifically because he wants to avoid the selling thing. But it's a similar, amongst the it's a similar principle. So it's better to swap than to actually sell. But because with money, then other temptations can come in. Once you've sold it, then opens the door to corruption much more. So I'm just going to do another section here, which is very important, which is rahn. This is permissible. وَإِن كُنْتُمْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ وَلَمْ تَجِدُوا كَاتِبًا فَرِهَانٌ مَقْبُوضًا. So rahn is what we call collateral or security or mortgaging or pledging something. It's when you, I, for example, borrow something from you. I borrow £1,000 from you, and you say, okay, I want you to leave something with me to show that you're I don't know you. I don't trust you. So give me something that's worth the same amount that what I've lent to you. So I'll say, okay, you have to take my car. It's collateral. My car is worth £1,000. So I take the £1,000 from you, go and do my business with it. Or sometimes it's with actual business. I'm buying something on credit from somebody.
Yeah.
In this particular case, I'm a traveler. He doesn't know me. That's why it specifically mentions in the Quran, because it's this more often than not happens in situations where people don't know each other. That's why it's required. If it's in the hadar, if you're in a place where you live, then people generally know you. What's more likely to happen than rahn is daman, which is somebody stands security for you. Says, look, if he fails to come, I will pay on his behalf. But it still happens, obviously, in rahn as well. It's permitted. The Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he died, had left a suit of armor with a Jewish trader because he'd taken some grain that he wanted to give as sadaqah. And he bought it from this Jewish trader and on credit, and he left his armor with him, and he was going to pay him back when the time of payment came, and then he died before he was able to pay him. So the guy kept the armor and obviously sold it until he received whatever he was owed to him, and if there was any more, that was then returned to the estate. So this happened even with the Messenger of Allah, and this wasn't wasn't when he was traveling. So even though the ayah in the Quran specifically talks about traveling, it's permitted under general circumstances. And it's usually for loans or buying things on credit as the main circumstances. And the reason for it is because often somebody who takes loans from lots of people. So if you then become bankrupt or die, the one who's got the collateral can claim back what he needs without having to worry about the other creditors. Whereas if you became bankrupt, or if I became bankrupt and I lent you and you'd lent me all this money, then you have to just take whatever. Well, you don't actually necessarily have to take a loss in bankruptcy because it's still owed later. But your initial payment is going to be a lot less than it would. You have to take a proportionally less amount alongside all of the other creditors. And if I die, then that's it. You can't get any more because you can't claim from my heirs. So if you've got collateral, though, you're safe, so long as that collateral is enough to cover your debt. So that's the purpose of it. So he says, وَالرَّهْنُ جَائِزٌ. It is permitted to have collateral of this form. وَلَا يَتِمُّ إِلَّا بِالْحِيَازَةِ. But it is not considered to be collateral until you have taken possession of it. So I might come to you and say, look, I want to borrow £1,000, and you can take my car as collateral. I'll bring you the keys later. And then I go off, and then I die before I've given you the car.
Yeah.
Even though I agreed to give you that collateral, you haven't taken possession of it yet.
So that car goes to your estate.
goes to the estate and gets divided up amongst all the creditors, you included. So that's the thing. It's very important. And not just, he says here, you have to do hiyaza, but also it has to be witnessed. So he says here, وَلَا تَنْفَعُ الشَّفَاعَةُ فِي حِيَازَتِهِ إِلَّا بِمُعَايَنَةِ الْبَيِّنَةِ. So, and you can't then bring witnesses who say this is collateral that he gave me. Say, for example, I die and it turns out that you have my car, and I owe you money as well. You say, no, he gave me this car as collateral. And then you get some witnesses who say, yeah, it's collateral. That's not enough, he says here. These witnesses must have been present when he gave you the collateral.
When he took possession.
Yeah, basically to prove that it really is collateral. I mean, because that is the most important thing. I might have just lent you the car. And then you're denying all of the other creditors. So he says here, number one, you have to have possession. Number two, it has to be proven by witnesses who are there at the point that it was made collateral and given to you. Otherwise, your word is not accepted, and it becomes the property of all the creditors. So these are some very important aspects of this. وَضَمَانُ الرَّهْنِ مِنَ الْمُرْتَهِنِ فِيمَا يُغَابُ عَلَيْهِ. So there's two types of property. There are things that are basically left out in the open. Houses, animals, everyone can see them. Cars nowadays. But there are also things that are small and that you take away with you. And that as soon as you're taken away with you, people can no longer see them, like clothes or jewelry or money or food, long grain or whatever it is. So all of these types of things, as soon as you take something away, you are liable for it as the person to whom it has been left, the pledgee. You are liable for it. What this means is if this thing perishes or disappears or is stolen, you claim it's stolen. Then unless you can produce proof that it actually was stolen, you are liable for it. That means that if it's lost, you take the loss. You can't demand another something as collateral because that one's gone, because you take the loss. But if it was a house and then the house is struck by lightning and burns to the ground, you're not liable. You can actually demand another house as collateral. Because it's clear now that it was, because you can hide something. Yeah. The problem is here with things that can be taken away, you can make a claim that something happened to it, but you've actually just hidden it away. So that word is not accepted. But that's very difficult to hide that with a house. You can't just sort of like cover the house with a big cloth and say no. So there's a difference. If something does happen and you can prove it, then you're not liable. That's generally the case with these things. But your word is not believed. Basically, what he means here is your word is not accepted, and so you are liable without proof. In other words, the loss is on you. So he says, وَضَمَانُ الرَّهِنِ مِنَ الْمُرْتَهِنِ فِي مَا يُغَابُ عَلَيْهِ وَلَا يَضْمَنْ مَا لَا يُغَابُ عَلَيْهِ. And he's not liable for what is not able to be taken away. وَثَمْرَةُ النَّخْلِ الرَّهِنِ لِلرَّاهِنِ. So if you are given date palms or apple trees or something else which produces fruit or produces revenue, anything that produces some sort of revenue, maybe it's like dates or grapevines or whatever, then he says here that the person who gave you the thing as collateral, he's still the owner of it, and he's still liable for it in reality, in the sense that if something is known to have happened to it, the loss is on him. Yeah. And when somebody is liable for something, they get the revenue from it. That's the general rule in the deen. The one exception to this is the ghasib, as he comes to. But generally speaking, if you bear liability for something, and in other words, the loss is on you, then any profit that comes from that thing is yours. Any revenue that comes out of that thing is yours. So this would also
give me an orchard as liability.
Yeah.
Dates.
Yeah.
And I sell the ones it produces.
You're not allowed to do that because the dates are not yours.
Okay.
There is some exceptions. If you do the work with the permission of that person, then there might be a separate contract now that it's his property. So, for example, if you are given a house as collateral, and you then start renting out that house, if you do it with the permission and you're doing the work of actually doing all of this, then work brings in reward. But otherwise, if you do it on your own bat without any consultation or permission.
Complicated.
So he says here, وَكَذَلِكَ غِلَّةُ الدُّورِ. So the rent that you get from houses, the same thing applies. It belongs to the person who left it with you. وَالْوَلَدُ الرَّهِنْ مَعَ الْأَمَةِ. So in the past, they had slave women. These slave women would sometimes have children. Those children would remain with their mother and would be considered part of the rahin. So, for example, if the person becomes bankrupt, that child goes with the mother. You sell the mother and the child together, and it remains. It's the other creditors have no right to that child. Stays with the mother. This happens with slave women, or happen with animals. You don't check a child remains in the same state as its mother if it's born in that state. Talidu ba'da rahin, so long as the child is born after the mother has become collateral. وَلَا يَكُونُ مَالُ الْعَبْدِ رَهًا. But he says here, if a slave has wealth of his own, that wealth does not go with the slave as collateral. So let's say, for example, I leave a slave with you that has amassed a huge sum of wealth, and that slave then becomes collateral with a debt that I have, and then I die. That person who I left the slave with, maybe the slave doesn't fully cover his debt after he sells the slave. What happens with the slave's assets that the slave owns?
Goes to the masters.
But it goes to everybody else.
That's just,
Yeah. If the slave is freed, obviously, then all of that wealth goes with the slave. But in the event of the slave being sold, his assets don't go with him. Assets go with it when a slave is freed, but not when he's sold. Because that opens up the door to people actually buying slaves purely for all of their property and not caring about the slave himself. Which might have happened in the past. So in those cases, the property remains with the original owner to avoid such things happening. Because it can open the door to all sorts of hiyal, sorts of ways of getting around various things and lots of corruption. So it was avoided. وَلَا يَكُونُ مَالُ الْعَبْدِ رَهِنْ إِلَّا بِالشَّرْطِ. But it can be, because that's the way with all of these things, because the shart of a Muslim must be accepted so long as it's valid. So if the Muslim makes a condition in the original contract that when the slave is left as collateral, his wealth is collateral alongside him, then that has to be abided by. The other creditors cannot come and say, no, that's not fair, because you already agreed to that. So the collateral, in effect, then, is the slave plus his wealth, not just the slave, when that condition is made. وَمَا هَلَكَ بِيَدِ أَمِينٍ فَهُوَ مِنَ الرَّاهِنِ. So there's sometimes also a case where instead of the collateral being left with you, we both agree on a third party who we both trust. Let's say Hamoud. We both say, all right, okay, I'm not going to give the collateral directly with you, but here, look, I will leave it with him. And if I fail to pay my debt, then, you collect what you need from him. But I'm not leaving it with you. You haven't got a suitable place to look after this animal, for example, whatever it is. So then while this horse that I've left as collateral, for example, is in the possession of Hamoud, the horse dies. Or, falls sick with horse plague or something like that, and becomes very, very weak and loses all of its value. What happens? Who is liable? I mean, as I said with the horse, let's not take a horse. Let's say, for example, because we said that's something that's not yuraba. Let's take it actually for, let's say, jewelry. Let's say I some expensive jewelry, I leave it with Hamoud to look after, and it's collateral for you. And then that's stolen from his house. Who is liable for that? Because this is something which is taken away
Yeah.
So in most of the time when it's taken away, unless it can be proven that it was stolen, as I said, he just says it's stolen. He says it's stolen, or you say it was stolen from him, but there's no proof of this. So what happens in this circumstance? The Amin has no daman on him because you're an Amin. You're a trusted party. So you cannot have any liability.
I take
No, because it wasn't left with you. So I left it and we put it with a third party. So it's on me. Yeah. So that's one of those circumstances where if you want to avoid liability for something, leave it with a third party and then you're safe from that liability. Anyway, so we'll finish there, inshallah. Are there any questions before we finish? There's only a couple more things to go in this section.
So Muslims cannot inherit from non-Muslims.
No. And non-Muslims cannot inherit from Muslims, both ways. But that doesn't mean they can't get things in a will.
Yeah, third, yeah.
Well, I mean, even we can't leave more than a third, but what a non-Muslim can leave is separate because they have their own laws. So if they leave you more than a third in their own thing, that's different. We are not allowed to leave as a Muslim more than a third. They, according to their own laws, it's a different thing. So it depends on whatever their own laws is, because the Qadi will then, if it's between a Muslim and non-Muslim, and it's specifically from them, he might take their laws sometimes, but usually he takes the laws of the Muslims. But sometimes, if it's something specific to them, he would take what is done amongst them. So it might be like a gift from a Muslim to a non-Muslim, almost considered, or a non-Muslim to a Muslim. But I mean, if you have non-Muslim children and Muslim children, and you want both of them to get from you when you die, then my suggestion is that you create a will and you make use of your third to make sure that those non-Muslim children are covered. And maybe in the doing of that, it will be good dawah for them. I mean, that's the suggestion in those circumstances. Or if your parents want to leave you something, you go and you say, look, make sure you make a will in which you leave me something. Because I can't inherit from you without a will, even in a country that says children inherit. Anyway. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد عبدك ورسولك النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما سبحان ربك رب العزة ما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين. See you next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.